Hyped intro, cut 1.
Attention.
Turn it up and get ready.
Get ready. You're tuned into
The Mekel Kasanova Podcast.
Get your dance shoes on because is on.
All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, The Mekel Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, Hawaii's favorite content creator, coming at you with another amazing weekly episode. And with this one, this is going to be truly phenomenal because we have with us the one, the only Gerald C. Rivers. You heard it right, folks. The voice of M. Bison himself, the leader of Shadowloo, Gerald C. Rivers. This is such an honor, and I'm just so amazed to be able to have Gerald on the show. And in this episode, we cover a lot of things from voice acting, spirituality, and more. And what's another amazing fact about Gerald is he is also the voice of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's truly amazing the work that he's done over the years. And I hope you guys go out and after this podcast, you'll go out and watch everything and see everything and listen to everything that Gerald has done, because he is truly a phenomenal man of our time. So if you're ready to do it, I'm ready to do it. Let's go ahead and get into this episode.
Bow down before my psycho power. I will strike you down into an infinite abyss of despair. Away with you!
Welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Mekel Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova. And I am honored and privileged to be able to have the one, the only, the great Gerald C. Rivers. Gerald, introduce yourself.
I'm Gerald C. Rivers. I'm the voice of M. Bison, as well as several other video game characters, and I'm also the voice of Martin Luther King. So there's an interesting sort of dichotomy there in that on the one hand, I spend time as a world dictator, and on the other hand, I spend time as reminding people about a world peace leader. Mm-hmm. Creates a little balance in my life, if you will.
It truly does. And do you mind giving us like a brief background on yourself, like how you got started, and also plug yourself and some of your upcoming ventures that you're working on, if you can.
I can. I'm not into a whole lot of self-promotion. I'm much more interested in doing the work than I am in talking about it. But I grew up in Compton, California, and I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. And in Compton, that was the birth and the introduction of Crips and Bloods and crack cocaine, gangs, violence. All that was my childhood, poverty, inner city. And what's interesting is how I really got started doing voices. There are two things. One, I used to mimic my grandfather when I was a kid. Somehow my voice started to change and turn earlier than it should have, so I had a little bass resonance in my voice already. And my grandfather had this kind of raspy quality in his voice, and he would sit in an easy chair or recliner, and he would say, "Bring me some tea." And so I could just hear that. So I started early on trying to fool my grandmother when my grandfather wasn't in the room and mimic him and have her bring a glass of tea in the room when he wasn't actually there. And that's when I thought, man, I'm pretty good at this. And then it's funny because I'd be outside playing, and I have issues around fairness. And so even as a kid, I wanted the kids to play fair. And when they didn't and would change the rules and say, no, we said it was going to be this thing, it would really upset me. I would get angry and I'd be ready to fight because somebody changed, especially if I'm winning and now you want to change the rules. I was angry as a kid based on the poverty and the violence that surrounded me. And my mom would come out and find out I'd punched some kid, and she would put me in a room by myself. And initially I turned the TV on, and I was thoroughly entertained by television. Here's what's interesting. I liked the old buddy movies, Bing Crosby and Bob Hope and Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin and the Three Stooges and the Little Rascals. There were all of these relationships that I found intriguing, and the way that people sort of played off of one another when you found a good partner who was quick or a team that was quick. Then I would just sit and be enthralled by the television. And then my mom decided this is no punishment for me at all. You can't have a television. My mom used to sew, and she would send me into her sewing room where there were no toys and no TV, and I would create stories. And I'd find pieces of thread and buttons and patterns and fabric, and I would create story and voices. And my mom would come in and kick the door open and say, nobody is supposed to be in here talking to you. And she would find me in that room by myself. The irony is I'd be outside playing, and I'd get into a fight, and she would send me into the room, and she would say, you're going to stay in here until you learn how to act. And I think that's exactly what I did. I don't think she knew what a gift she gave me by putting me in a room and removing stimuli that I would respond to and sort of drone out. I had to create things in my mind. So I created voices and images, and then I knew I wanted to be an actor. At some point I thought I wanted to be a ventriloquist. Ironically enough, my mom, being a single parent and female-headed household, was concerned about her boy playing with dolls, even though it was a ventriloquist doll. Back then, there wasn't the kind of acceptance that there is now to allow children to just be who they are. So she would say, no, you're not going to play with any dolls. And I'd be like, okay. And so then it's funny because they would have the Easter play or the Christmas play at church or at school, and I would memorize my lines, and I would be frustrated that the other kids couldn't remember something like, and today is Easter Day, and the parents are sitting out there, and today, that would infuriate me. But it clearly was an indication that I had sort of an inkling for performing and speaking and presenting. And then in terms of the voiceover, the truth is I didn't know that you could make a living as a voiceover artist. So I did not grow up aspiring to be a voiceover actor. I thought I work in live theater. I've done Shakespeare and regional theater and trained and went to school and got my degree in theater. But I had no idea there was a whole world of voiceover. I mean, I heard people on the radio, and I heard sort of those classic bringing you live, that kind of thing. But I didn't imagine that was a way to make a living. I was in Atlanta, and I went to school at Morehouse College. And when I left Morehouse, I started my own production company. It was called River's Edge Productions. And I remember thinking, man, I'm going to have a great commercial. It's going to say, come to the River's Edge, where we meet your creative needs. And so I was doing like industrials and music videos and commercials, and Atlanta or Georgia's a right-to-work state, so I could work on projects that I might not otherwise be able to work on because they weren't controlled by the unions. So I got a bunch of industrials, and we would lay down what was known as a dry track. So that meant that I'm going to say this, we're going to bring artists in, voiceover artists in, and they're going to hear what the client is looking for, and they're going to do something kind of like that. And before I knew it, the clients would say, we can't find anybody to sound as good as you already sound. Why don't we just use you? So again, this light bulb goes off that perhaps I have a knack at this thing, but I think it's both artistic creativity and intelligence. Like if you listen to what the market will bear and people tell you the tone of it, I think a trained actor should be able to offer that. So I started doing them myself. And for me, that just meant a double paycheck here. I'm the producer on this project, and now I'm going to lay down the voiceover as well. I think the first sort of outside of that box job that I got was CNN during this time was doing a special on AIDS and the elderly. And they didn't want it to be too heavy. They wanted kind of a poetic, classical, Shakespearean approach to present this information to seniors in a way that was palatable to them. And so then I did that. And then when I saw what they paid me for a non-union job, it was like, I'm not even paying myself enough in my own company. Is this what people make to do this? Anyway, I come back to LA, and I have a lot of musician friends, and a good friend of mine, Josh Phillips, we're still friends today, and he's a big rock and roll, plays guitar and lead singer and writes and performs all over. He was fighting with his girlfriend and didn't have a place to stay and came to crash at my place. And while he was there, his car broke down and he had an audition. And I took him to the audition. I drove him there, and then I sat in the lobby and inappropriately was on my phone in the lobby. And the director, or the casting director, came out and said, are you a voiceover talent? And I looked up and said, but of course. And he had me read, and I booked M. Bison that day. I had no idea what this was or what was going on. I went in to read, and that was now well over a decade ago. It was Jonathan Klein at New Generation Pictures, and he was casting for Street Fighter, and I happened to be sitting in the lobby on my phone, and he had me come in and read, and I've been doing that job ever since. And then here's what I would say to people who are interested in this crazy business. There are lots of people out there with great voices. There aren't lots of people out there with great voices who are trained and who people want to work with. And so I made sure I was somebody that people wanted to work with. I was fun. I had a good attitude. More importantly, I was professional and tried to get in and do the job as quickly and efficiently as possible. That's not to say that I cut corners, but I wanted to prove I could get it done in less time than the average Joe was going to come in. And then what we found out was like they'd have time left over, and they'd go, since you're here, we have another character we haven't been able to find anybody for. Would you mind reading for that one as well? And it's kind of like, and they told two friends, and they told two friends, and so on. So yeah, kid from Compton, got in trouble, went to school at Morehouse, got a degree in theater here in LA, and just found my way into voiceover because I was in the right place at the right time, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's amazing. I never would have guessed that. I would have thought like you were like actively auditioning for M. Bison, but that's an amazing story.
It's literally sitting in the lobby, and I should not have been on my phone, but I was, and I think I was talking like a little louder than I should have, and the guy came out, and at first he looked at me like, you know, the hell are you doing? We're holding auditions in this room back here. And then I continued talking. Then I said, hold on a second. And I went to him, and he said, are you a voiceover talent? And I said, I literally said, but of course, and went in and booked that job that day.
Wow, that's and it's kicked off like an amazing career.
It really has. It really has. And I didn't know even then that it would lead to what it has in the meantime. Because now there are people who like aspire to be voiceover actors and artists and want to be in video games and anime and cartoons, and that's sort of their goal coming up. You know, I'm a little older than I once was, but when I was coming up, it was not the kind of job that many people aspired to. There were a few guys in radio, and there were people, you know, like Culpepper and, you know, In a World, those guys who were doing that, and they had most of the jobs. You know, you had Mel Blanc doing all of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and he was doing Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny and Porky Pig. He was doing all of them himself.
Wow.
So it wasn't something that we really thought about. I did growing up, that there was a career there. And now, of course, we know that there is an international fan base.
Man, because I was going to say, like, you know, you've voiced so many characters from X-Death and Dissidia, Final Fantasy, to Jax in Mortal Kombat, Leonidas from Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 2, and, you know, Jaeger and The Last Remnant, which I believe it just re-released today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got an email because I do a lot of reviews for Square and other game companies, so they just sent me like, hey, do you want to review this? And I'm like, no, I've got like 12 other games right now. But, you know, most infamously, like M. Bison himself, like, how does it feel knowing that you've been able to, you know, impact and influence generations of fans, you know, coming up with your, you know, role as in your portrayal as M. Bison and all the different characters you've done?
Yeah, Street Fighter in particular was around when I was like a kid, or at least a teenager, and then it sort of went away, and I was a part of the resurgence. What I didn't know then, that I learned from Jonathan Klein and the folks at New Generation Pictures, was this whole world of the how do you call it, the comic books that were the graphic novels, and all these backstories, that this story had taken place long before the game ever came out or became popular. There were the stories of these characters. So as an actor, to have access to somebody who was interested in these stories when they were graphic novels, who could provide me insight about the background and who these people really were and how they came to be and why they were the way that they were, that was invaluable. I mean, I got in at the ground floor. This was a guy who learned to speak Japanese and who had traveled to Japan and who built a company that he said, look, when you decide to take these games and bring them to the States, I want to be a part of it. And that's exactly what happened. And to get in with him was, and then it was fun because I was angry as a kid, and then I got into a whole peace practice. And so this was an opportunity to sort of release some of that anger and anxiety in a both safe and lucrative way. It was for play. So when I took the headphones off, I went back to being like peaceful and chill and wanting to resolve issues in conflict rather than create them. So it was the most fun. There was a part of me that was looking for an outlet that was safe. And I know there's controversy in the media about violent video games and the effect or the impact that they're having on people. But just like anything else, you have millions of people who are playing these games who are not going out in real life and doing something ill or violent. And yes, there are some people who are triggered, but I think it's a great outlet, and people can leave it right there. It's for play. It's not the real world, whether it's a video arcade, and now with all the consoles you can put in your home and on your computer and on your cell phone. People are playing all kinds of games. I think it's a great outlet.
Yeah. Like I know for me. Oh, I'm getting feedback. Is that me? Oh, okay. Never mind. I was getting some reverb, but I know for me, like one of the things that was good for me with gaming, because I grew up, I didn't like to read, I had an active imagination. I loved cartoons and I loved playing with toys, but my mother could never get me to love reading. And then one day she gave me Final Fantasy VII, which is crazy. It's been well over 20 years since that one came out. And she said, hey, you can't play anything else, because I used to play all the fighting games and the Mega Mans and all that. She's like, you can't play anything else until you beat this. And I was like, Mom, it has so much reading in it. I don't want to read it. She's like, no, you're going to play it. And then that one game, after a week of just sticking with it, I was like, oh man, this world is so alive, because when I read, I visualize things, and it really fostered my love for reading. So then I started reading, Lord of the Rings and the Tales of the Attori, and then I got into reading, classic works. Was it the Notchless? I'm trying to think of it. Slipping my mind, but it has the Notchless in it. The ship. I can't think of the name of it. I'll think of it later. But I just went from being a kid that was just rambunctious and energetic to every day I was at the library just reading books, hours upon hours. And when I hear people say, "Oh, video games are terrible," blah blah blah, I'm like, not for everybody.
No, not for everybody. And who knew that this was the way that the world was going?
Yeah.
That we would be spending this much time in front of a video screen of any kind for hours and hours and hours on end.
Yeah.
No, I support the industry as a safe outlet for people to deal with some anxiety and some stress and to release some stuff and then go back to the real world.
Yeah. Definitely is. And this leads me to my next question. When you are voicing Bison or voicing any of your other characters, like what is the process for you to get into becoming the character?
In Bison in particular, I was familiar with the persona from years ago, or when I was a teen or in my 20s playing with Street Fighter back then. And I remember him being so difficult to defeat. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that, and then having the backdrop from his history and Shadowloo and in these battles and his relationship and his desire for world domination, that's a lot of fun. Do you know what I mean? That's a lot of fun. And when you have that much information to feed and fuel his backstory as an actor, they would show me images of M. Bison, because most of these, they came over from Japan and they were in Japanese. And so part of the early sort of transition and translation was matching lip flap and understanding the translation and making it work and make sense, because sometimes they use a lot of syllables that say very little, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. They say very little and there's a lot in the English translation. So then there's an opportunity for me to help make him my own and to match the action. I mean, having a visual of what this guy looks like and acts like, and having a backstory is incredibly that's not always the case. There's some characters that this character didn't exist before, and you're going to create the model or the mold for how this character is going to go forward. But with M. Bison, he already had a story. My job was to, and I know this sounds strange to non-actors, was to find the M. Bison in me, the person who really wished they could take over the world and have people do exactly what I want them to do, and defeat and vanquish my enemies and call them worms and use superpowers to like psycho crush them. That's fun. That's fun, because when the game turns off, the people reset. We get to come back and just be human again, and you can talk smack to one another, but M. Bison in particular, and X-Death from the Final Fantasy series, the idea that his name was X-Death really appealed to me. That he was beyond death, and that he was beyond the place that most people fear. That he was not afraid of the void or the space where people don't have information and things they can tether themselves to, where he's already surpassed that. He's already gone. And then even Vanitas in StarCraft, he was really an immortal. So here I was getting these characters who both literally and figuratively would in essence live forever. They were all beyond, because you could kill M. Bison and he would be back for the next fight. You could kill, you could think you could kill an immortal or an ex-death, but the idea of that was so... It would embolden one as an actor to say, I can take some risk with this because this is beyond what people actually know. So I get to decide what it feels like to have conquered death, to have regenerated over and over and over again. Because in one of the stories, they had found a way to defeat M. Bison, and then they took what amounted to his consciousness and placed it someplace else so that it could be moved from one body to another. And they saved his brain, and he would say, "Get me out of here, get me a body so that I can function." Again, much deeper than the simple world of video games, and going into a much more deep and metaphysical space, the idea that we do exist beyond our physical body, that there is a soul or an entity or a consciousness that enlivens the physical body and not the other way around. So then it's very liberating is all I can tell you.
Yeah.
None of them will ever die. And even after I'm gone, these characters will live on.
Yeah. And, that makes me want to ask, one more question about M. Bison is, like, when you landed that role, like, how did that moment feel for you?
I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know that a decade later or more that I would still be doing it. I kind of thought, oh, okay, that's great. It's going to be a one-off, and the next time they do it, they're going to get somebody else. But the online response to the game and to my characterization was, we love this guy. I mean, there were a few people who were married to some older versions of M. Bison, and they questioned my interpretation. But the vast and overwhelming majority of folks were like, you nailed it. So that they were the ones who demanded that the people who were coming out with the various iterations and Street Fighter versus Tekken and Super Street Fighter and 5 and 6 and 7, they've grown up with me as that voice, and they'd have a hard time imagining somebody else doing it. And so I have this poster in the back from the original Wreck-It Ralph, and now we're on to Wreck-It Ralph 2, where I haven't seen the movie, but M. Bison makes a cameo appearance in the film. And as the story goes with Wreck-It Ralph and how M. Bison wound up in the film, I had been auditioning for Disney for another project for months, and I'd gone in 4 or 5 times, and the regular audition, and then the callbacks, and then directors and producers and network executives for a cartoon like we'd have to do for a television series or a feature film. And finally they were like, we're not sure, we think we're going to go in a different direction. And then my agent called and said, Disney called, and I was like, I'm not going back to audition for Disney. I've auditioned for them for this project 5 times. They've asked me to fix it. And she was like, calm down. They are not asking you to audition. They are offering you a job. And I was like, oh, okay, what's the job? And apparently some of the guys working on the film had decided early on about some of the video game characters that had to be a part of the story. And unanimously, it felt like they said, we have to have M. Bison. And then it was like, we don't want a guy who sounds like M. Bison. We don't want to hire somebody to try to imitate M. Bison. We want M. Bison. And it was great for me to go in there, and there were people in the studio who wanted to take pictures with me because I was in Bison. I was like, you guys just offered me a job. This thing is going to be released internationally. You can take as many pictures as you want. But to have found the character in me and to bring him, he's easily accessible for me now. And when you go into the studio and they're going to do it again, they will play you a reference. They will say, this is what M. Bison sounds like. And I can hear about 2 seconds. And in that moment, beware the mighty Bison. It just shows up. It's like, and there he is. Thank you. Thank you for launching my career in this industry.
Awesome. And also, speaking of Wreck-It Ralph, you're in 2 of them. That's amazing.
It is, especially when, as an actor, even as a voice actor, you don't have to audition. Mm-hmm. Because they put some big names in it was John C. Reilly and Sarah Silverman and a host of other folks, Jane Lynch, for them to just call and say, we want you to do it. And then it was Rich Moore and Lassiter, and to meet those people and for them to just say, we don't really know you, but apparently you have to be in this film. So here you go. And then it obviously did really, really well. And I thought it was a well done, the first one. I haven't seen the next one yet, but I thought it was a well done film and that it was good for kids and adults and had a little bit for everybody. And the idea of bringing some of those old video game characters and giving them a second shot, and Cubert of all things, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then of course there were a bunch of things they had to create because they didn't have permission, but the idea that they put him in a Badanon meeting was I just thought that was brilliant. I thought it was classic.
Oh man. And this is the last video game question I'm going to ask you before we delve into your other work. I wanted to ask, do you often get to work with, directly with companies like Capcom and Square Enix or Disney, or do you go through, your agent to them? What is the process like?
By now, I'm in the union, so everything goes through my agent. So whether it's Blizzard and the folks at World of Warcraft, or it's Disney, or it's Capcom, or my job is to show up and do my job. There's a team and a host of other people who do their jobs in order to get me in the room for that job. By the time I get there, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, your job as an actor is to audition. By the time you get the job, that's really the easy part, because they already want you. You've already done something, and you just have to recreate the feeling tone that you presented for them when you got the job, whether you're on camera or whether you're behind a microphone inside a studio booth. They already want you. Your job at that point is to just not blow it, is to just not get in your head and think too much and try to do too much and, I'm going to wow them now with something I didn't show them before. No, there's an old song, you got to give the people what they want. That's your job at that point. Go give them, they've already made it clear, this is what we want. You don't go in and reinvent the wheel at that point. You go give them what they want, and your job is to have depth in the character so that you give them what they want and they feel something. Here, I coach not a lot, but I have a handful of voiceover coaching clients. And I tell them all the time, it's not about how you sound, it's about how you make people feel. Mm-hmm. And if you can evoke an emotion from the listener or the gamer or the client or the potential consumer, that's the intangible. There's a bunch of other people who can sound like you or me, but not all of them are going to evoke a smile or a frown or anger or frustration or joy. Our job is to help people get in touch with their emotions just by using our voice.
Amazing. And you're also very well known as the voice of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and have achieved innumerable accolades for performing and speaking all over the country and world. How did you end up being able to do this?
That That's another interesting story. Growing up, I knew I wanted to be an actor. Mm-hmm. There weren't very many opportunities for me in Compton, California. Mm-hmm. There was, however, a school of performing arts called Sheenway, and the woman's name was Dolores Blunt, and she was a black actress in the 50s here in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Her dad, Dr. Sheen, was one of the first black doctors here in LA, and she had a little money, and she put together this school called Sheenway, or the Sheenway Theater Arts Repertory, and they were teaching kids acting, singing, dancing, and also karate. There was a Kenpo master in LA, and it was a way to teach us discipline. So you would go in and you'd have your acting class, and at the same school, you would take Kenpo karate and 12 Weapons of Death, which initially would make you think, man, if I go in there and I learn 12 Weapons of Death, when I go back to Compton, I'm going to be like, the samurai master. I'm just going to be cutting people down. But of course, they teach you a great deal of discipline and respect before you ever pick up a weapon, before you ever learn how to strike, punch, kick, or block. And by the time you do, you realize that's not what this is for. So I was a little tricked going in. I thought, this is great. I'm going to dance. I'm going to be doing flying drop kicks. But that's not the way that it turned out at all. My mom couldn't afford to pay for the classes, so I had to hustle and figure out, how am I going to pay for these classes? And my nickname was Old Man in the Hood, because everybody thought I was wise for some reason. But at about 16, actually right out of high school, I got a chance to audition for a show that was called Voices of America. And it was a group called PNC Productions, a little small mom and pop deal, and they were getting ready to tour the country with this show, and I was going to sing and dance because I'd learned how to be a member of the chorus and kind of shuffle along and hold my part and, be a part of these harmonies and whatever. So I get in the show, and they're voices from American history, and some of the voices included Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, and others, Bessie Smith, and great singers. And so there was another actor, a kid, well, he was a little older than me, I think, but he was playing Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Frederick Douglass. And I just thought to myself, well, he doesn't need to do all three. And I meditated on it. We talked about that a little bit early, like, what should I go for? Mm-hmm. And without fail, all other possible options dropped away. And it was like, that's what I'm supposed to do. My grandmother had some old record albums of Martin Luther King. So I would put these record albums on, and I would listen, and I was learning his cadence and his pitch and his pacing, and really just trying to get into how he was making people feel. Back to that again. And right before the group went on tour, I tugged the producer's coattail and said, I'd like to vie for a role. That's what we called it back then. You could be in a show, and if somebody else had a lead role and you wanted to compete and you were better, the producer and the director wanted the show to be better, they would give you a chance. You could fail, no hard feelings, nobody's feelings were hurt, everybody wanted to be a part of this thing. So I'll never forget, I had worked on this thing, and I took the producer and the director in the back room, and I gave them my best 4-minute segment of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech that I had worked on for a month. And the director's name was Benny Pritchett, and he was a little flamboyant, and he came out saying, change the program, change the program. And that started this whole Martin Luther King thing for me. And it was just an excerpt. It was maybe 5 minutes from the I Have a Dream speech in the middle of a show that was 2 hours that covered 20 plus historical figures in American history. But it was a big hit for the show and for me. And initially it was a debate as to whether or not I would go on tour. Did they need another song and dance man on tour. And my mom, I remember I was in trouble. I'll tell you, I had a probation officer. Because growing up in Compton, most of the people that I knew either had a probation officer or they had a parole officer or they were incarcerated. So we had to get permission from my probation officer for me to go on tour. We were going to Chicago, to Cleveland, to New York, to Atlanta, to Miami with this big show of Voices in American History. And I remember all of the people who came to my aid, teachers that I'd had, and they said, let this kid go. It's like, if you don't let him go, I think he's going to be angry. And the things that he might turn to otherwise, he's going out to play Martin Luther King. And it's like, if you let him say those words over and over for 2 months while he's on tour, some of it might actually sink in. And so I get back from the tour and my mom was blown away. Here you're 17 years old, you barely had a driver's license, you know, you haven't even thought about going to college, and you're on tour. And you're going from city to city, and she was like, I didn't even know you could do this. So when I came back, she said, what did you do? And I said, well, I played Martin Luther King in the show. She said, well, would you come to my church and do whatever you did? So I went to the church, and there was a lady there from the Compton Library. She said, would you come to the library and do an excerpt from the I Have a Dream speech? I went to the library. There's a guy there from the Boy Scouts of America. He said, will you come to the troop? And it literally was, and they told two friends, and schools and churches. And then, of course, I had to learn more speeches. I had to learn that speech in its entirety. I had to learn other speeches, partly because I was just tired of doing that one. In the process, I learned so much more about this man who was in many ways more than a man, and his philosophy and his teachings and his approach and his meditation and his mental acuity and the level of reading that he had done. I didn't know who Martin Luther King really was. We were afraid of Martin Luther King because if you said Martin Luther King and my grandmother was around, she'd go, oh, Lord, oh, Martin Luther King, oh, it was just like, oh, my. It would just shake her up and she'd be crying. And, you know, it was like, man, this is kind of serious, this Martin Luther King thing. But I learned so much about him. And then I decided to go to Morehouse College, where he went to school. I never would have gone there had I not had the experience of doing these speeches and hearing him in his writing talk about Morehouse. And Morehouse was then and still is now the only predominantly African-American all-male institution of higher living in the Western Hemisphere. There are several girls' schools that are black and white and otherwise, but it's the only one that it's not all black, it's predominantly black, and it's all men, and it's the only one of its kind in this part of the world. And some very significant people have gone to Morehouse College and gone on to do great things. And so that thing just sort of snowballed. Then when I got to Morehouse, I wanted them to know, well, I do this thing. And then they were like, oh, my God, we've had people here for years, but nobody has ever been able to master the cadence, the pitch, the pacing, the intensity, the emotion, the way that you have. So then I get the lead in a play called Martin. It's a musical that goes off Broadway. And it's like, here it goes again, being in the right place at the right time. It's not the whole story. It's also being prepared and imagining yourself there. Because wanting to be an actor, I imagine, well, I could be off Broadway. I didn't really know what that meant. When the opportunity presented itself, I was ready. And I remember going to college at a junior college here in LA City College, and I won the talent show because I did Martin Luther King. 2 years later, I was elected student body president, partly because people knew me as the guy who did Martin Luther King. And so it got a little intense for a while. I had to take a break because people were like, you're going to be the next Martin Luther King. And I had to say, no, I'm going to be the first Gerald C. Rivers. And now here we are 35, almost 40 years later, and people are still asking me to do so. I go to prisons, I go to churches, I go to homeless shelters, I go to rehab centers, I go to Chase Manhattan Bank, I go to the Coca-Cola Company, I performed for the King family. I've been in D.C. and New York and Chicago and Cleveland and Dallas and Houston and Oakland and San Francisco and L.A. and Kansas, and I've never really promoted it. I just go where I'm called. And now, of course, there are a lot more speeches, and I know I'm getting a little long-winded on you, but this
No, it's fine.
this
Keep
is
going.
my passion. You know, what I do voiceover for a living, and I make a decent living at it. I do Martin Luther King for a life. So I've written a couple of shows. I've got a one-man show. I've got a two-man show. There's a two-man show called Martin in Music, where I teamed up with a Broadway vocalist named Charles Holt, who was in The Lion King and Smokey Joe's Cafe, and we tour college campuses doing Martin and music. And all we do is Martin Luther King speeches and the music that he loved and that influenced a generation. And young people today still resonate with it. And so I go where I'm called. I just show up. But you can't imagine me doing that since I was 17 years old. I'm now in my 50s, and I have no shame telling you that. If you do that over and over and learn dozens of Martin Luther King speeches and sermons and writings and books and presentations, you can't help but have it permeate who you are. And then when I see the effect that it has on other people, and I've met people who knew Dr. King who would just burst into tears or just have to hold me and hug me, and people who didn't meet him and say, I wish I had met him, but today I felt like I met him. I felt like I was sitting in the audience when he spoke. Some people will describe what I do as channeling. I haven't gone so far as to say that, but I can tell you it's different than anything else that I do, and I feel different, and it's great. It's great. So yeah, that's another aspect of, and it's the perfect balance for being in Bison and Immortal and Ex-Death, and do you know what I mean? These violent people who are destroying and annihilating, and then somebody else who's lifting people up and dealing with the people who are at the lowest of the low and telling them that they're worth something too.
Awesome. You know, and I wanted to ask you, like, because this is just my nature, I like to dig deeper, but, you know, with the one-man show that you have, you know, What Do You Dream Of? Like, would you mind, like, sharing more of, you know, that with the audience, and, like, what about that, like, strongly resonates within you?
You know what? I'm going to send you a clip. There's a clip on YouTube called What Do You Dream Of? That's the perfect promo for the show. Okay. And so what it is, it's not just a one-man show, because I have African drummers, I have a dancer, I have a rapper, and my son is a speed painter. And so during the course of the show, he would paint what amounts to 3 paintings, but they're all on the same canvas. He would start with the first one. It would be a globe of the world. And then in another scene, he would paint over that, and it would morph into Mahatma Gandhi. And by the end of the show, he would paint over that, and it would be an image of Martin Luther King. But I'm the only person who speaks in the show. And so what I wanted to do was do some of the speeches that many people have never heard. Everybody's heard I Have a Dream. What most people don't know, there's another speech called The American Dream. And it was a precursor to I Have a Dream. So here's a little history lesson for you. Before I Have a Dream was ever this great speech at the March on Washington for the March for Jobs, Peace, and Freedom, Martin Luther King had gone on to what amounts to a whistle-stop tour, going from city to city, telling people about the American dream. And he did it in Chicago. He did it in Detroit. So people had heard about this American dream, which is what America is supposed to be about. And when he went to D.C. to the March on Washington, where he delivers the I Have a Dream speech, The night before, the organizers got together with him and said, okay, we want you to talk about this, but please don't mention that. You can talk about this, but please don't mention that, because this is going to step on some toes, and this is going to offend some people, and we've got this world audience and all these people present. Let's stick to the facts and, like, hit them hard here. And another little tidbit, the brainchild for the March on Washington was a man by the name of Bayard Rustin, who is lost in the obscurity of history. Bayard Rustin was a black, gay, communist Quaker. It's like you couldn't have more stuff sort of marks against you in this country at that time. So they did not allow him to speak at the march. And his role was sort of put back in the shadows because they didn't want people to say, oh, he's gay, or oh, he's a communist, or oh, he's a Quaker, not to mention the fact that he's just a black man in America. And so very few people know that. But King had the insight and the compassion on more than one occasion to recognize Bayard Rustin as somebody who contributed greatly. Anyway, when King gets to the March on Washington, he has, and you can see this on YouTube and on video, he has a prepared speech that they helped him. He had speechwriters who assisted him. And he starts by reading from this prepared text. And then you hear Mahalia Jackson, if you listen really closely in the distance, say, tell him about the dream, Martin. And Mahalia Jackson had sang, and she was the premier gospel singer of the day. And he lifts his head and he tells us about the dream when everybody's listening. So it wasn't planned that way. He spoke from his heart about this dream that he had that was about America, that he was like, because I have a dream, if you listen to the speech, that is deeply rooted in the American dream. And that's what he was talking about. And so to give people that kind of insight and to have them know that there was more to him than just that was the basis of trying to do What Do You Dream Of? So we did both the I Have a Dream speech at the beginning and the American Dream speech at the end, and several others in between, with painting and drumming and dancing and original raps about Martin Luther King. And then I opted to play several different characters. I played a grandma. I played an inmate. I played a guy who was locked up, who felt like he was lost, who felt like even I can hear what this man is saying. And it was just important for me, for people to get that there was more to him than I Have a Dream. The other thing, sometimes I'm reluctant to say, but this is the world we live in. Martin Luther King was not a perfect man. He just did some perfect things. But he made some mistakes, and he was unfaithful to his wife. And J. Edgar Hoover had tapes of him in a hotel room with another woman that he sent to Martin Luther King's wife. We don't live in the media gobbledygook age that we live in now, because he threatened to release those tapes to the media, and Martin Luther King said, release them. I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. What I'm doing is so important that it doesn't matter to me. And if the people won't listen to me anymore, they won't listen to me anymore. But I'm willing to risk it all to tell the truth. And the newspapers and the media refused to release that, even when they got it from J. Edgar Hoover. But what that tells me about King and how he's related to me and everybody else is that you don't have to be perfect to do something great. Because many of us, we will say, I could never do that because of something I did in my past. I feel guilty about this. Christian teaching and theology, and even Judeo-Christian, has this heavy guilt like laying over us, and we feel like, well, I did that last year, so I can't do anything next year. Or I've already made a mistake, so I might as well keep making other mistakes. King teaches me that you can make a mistake and you can still do something great. Yeah. He was in prison, for all the guys that are locked up. When I visit the prisons and you see grown men crying from Martin Luther King, that happened, some of them before they were even born, but they feel this message of truth resonating with them, that ultimately we're all human. and we're all spiritual. And I'll drop another piece of knowledge on you about King since we're on this.
Drop it.
He went to school at Morehouse. He went to school at Boston University. He went to the Crozier Seminary School. While at Boston, he wrote a bunch of papers that led to talks, speeches, books. I was fortunate enough to get to go to Boston and go into the private archives, and they brought me boxes of Martin Luther King's handwritten material. Mm-hmm. And I sat there for hours. You have to wear gloves because the oil on your hand could deteriorate the papers over time. But because of my reputation and who I was and who I am, they said, Mr. Rivers, we're going to give you a private room and we'll bring you as many boxes as you can read. And I sat there and cried like a baby. And every time I touched a piece, I could feel the electricity and the life that was put into it. But you know what he wrote about? More than civil rights, more than equal rights, more than racial equality?
What?
Prosperity and abundance.
Ooh.
He knew that there was enough money, enough food, enough clothes, enough cars, enough homes, enough jobs, enough land to satisfy the world over again several times. So he said what we're missing is that there is more than enough. We are living under this lie, this auspices of scarcity and lack, that there's not enough. So if I don't have enough, I'm going to take some of what you have. If I don't have enough food, I'm going to take your food. I'm afraid, and this is the same, I don't want to get political, but it's the same thing that politicians are fighting about today. They're coming to take our jobs. They're coming to take our homes. They're coming to take our opportunities. King said we live in an abundant universe. And not only is there more than enough now, but there is more always being created and generated. Yeah. Now, we may be using it faster than we should, but there's always producing more. The entire universe is expanding at its core to make room, get this, for our ideas.
Yeah.
Just our needs, but our ideas. Nobody knew that there would be computers. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Tesla had this idea that nobody knew we'd be driving cars and they already have a flying car. They can't market it fully yet, but a car that can lift over traffic and fly in the air and land in your driveway. That technology already exists. If that's true, we have enough ideas to last us a lifetime. So we have enough money and enough food and enough jobs and enough of everything that we need because we have more than enough ideas. Yeah. So prosperity and abundance is the truth of the universe that we live in, not lack, scarcity, and not enoughness. It's just not the truth. And if everybody knew that, we would operate differently. But the powers that be want to limit resources and lead us to believe that we're running out of fuel, that we used to think we were solely dependent on the Middle East for oil. Now we're producing more oil than we're getting from someplace else. Yeah. That means it was here all along.
Yeah.
So that's King's two things that I take away from King. One, you don't have to be perfect. Two, there's more than enough to go around. And three, it begins with us being kind to each other.
Definitely.
And some of that begins with us being kind to ourselves, because we're our worst enemy. And we hate ourselves enough that we will hate somebody else because of how we feel about ourselves. So King teaches me, and the messages aren't outdated. They aren't stale or old. It's still what we're living with and dealing with today. So I'm happy to go to colleges and universities and corporate structures and facilitate a conversation about us being honest and being real and being kind. Especially like, oh my God, the world that we live in now needs somebody to facilitate a conversation still about race. But race was not the issue for King. Race was the issue that prevented us from getting to some of the real issues.
Yeah, that's true.
So he taught me a lot. He taught me the practice of forgiveness. He taught me the practice of giving forward, even when I don't think somebody deserves something, that my job is to give it to them anyway, because it's not my job to judge them. So I give people money on the side of the road, and there are people who ask, why did you give that guy $5? He's just going to go buy a liquor or alcohol or drugs. I don't care. I know if I was standing on the side of the road, whatever had happened in my life that led me there, if I just wanted $5, I wouldn't want to have to explain to somebody else or to everybody what I was going to do with it. Just give it to them.
And, you know, I have a way of looking at, like, that kind of action is kind of a way my mother taught me growing up, was like, when you do for others, like if you were to give money to someone on the street or to any random stranger or do an act of kindness, that's a release of energy. And it's important that your energy is, you know, genuine, it's true, it's positive. Yeah. And when you release that out to the world, like it comes back to you, but it also betters the world around you.
Right. And what's interesting about King is that you're not doing it to get something back. You're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And the byproduct is it comes back to you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come back because, like, you can help somebody and that person can continue to treat you like crap. But somewhere else, somebody else does something for you that you didn't even expect, and it was because you put it out there. So it doesn't come back from the same place that you put it, because this universe is ever expanding.
Yeah.
But to think that King's voice, you know, has been coming out of my mouth for over half my life, and that I watch the impact that it has on people, and that it forces me to study the philosophy and the teachings even more. I mean, this whole idea of nonviolence is a novel concept. And I'll drop this on you. King says that nonviolence as an approach is effective because it disarms the opponent. It exposes his moral defenses. Mm-hmm. It weakens his morale, and he doesn't know what to do. People know how to deal with violence. If you hit somebody, they know how to hit you back. If they hit you and you offer them love, they are confused.
Yeah.
They might think you're stupid. They might think you're crazy. They don't know how to respond. And he gives us, of course, examples of people who, he says, it might get you scarred up sometimes, but in essence, it's better to go through life with a scarred up body than a scarred up soul.
Yeah. That's very true. And, you know, with all that you've gained from being the voice of Dr. King, and it's very apparent. I know we were talking before we started the show, you know, spirituality is a very big part of who you are. Like, can you, like, walk us through, like, how that became so impactful for you?
I was angry. I spent a lot of time as a black male youth being angry, not only at the system, not only at my parents, not only at the police, not only at the rival gangs, not only at the situation of poverty, that somehow that had to be channeled and redirected, because a goal of mine at 8 years old was to stay out of the penitentiary. Like, if I can stay out of the penitentiary, then my life is a success, because I saw so many men around me going to jail. There are guys that I grew up with that went to jail when we were 16 years old. I'm 53. Some of them are still in jail. There is nothing that a 16-year-old could have done, in my opinion, mm-hmm. at that point, with the limited amount of world knowledge and life knowledge that should constitute him spending 3 times that amount of his life behind bars. And then if you ever release him, he's been so conditioned to being incarcerated. How do you then expect him to come out and function in a quote-unquote civil society, which I put big air quotes around a civil society. I'm going to say this, too, since you got me all on the political and the spiritual. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. In California, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of black men who are incarcerated on drug charges, many of which are marijuana. Now, marijuana is legal. Those guys are still in jail, and the very politicians who put them there are investing in marijuana as a stock so that they can earn money. The very politicians nationwide, these politicians are going, oh, there's money in legalized marijuana right now, just like there was money in privatized prisons. And so I would think, and I may be going out on a limb here, that one, they should let those guys out because now you've decided that you've decriminalized it, but now they're still serving time for it. And two, they should have a job in the marijuana industry. They know about it. They were selling it. They created the industry that you're now making money off of. Then you're going to let them out of prison, and it's going to be hard for them to get a job because they have a felony on their record and they've spent time in prison. Why not let them do the very thing that they were doing, that they were probably pretty good at, that led them there in the first place? So looking at the world at large and watching the cyclical nature of things, laws change. One year it's 55, the next year it's 65 is the speed limit, the next year it's 70. Spiritual laws don't ever change.
Yeah.
Be kind. That doesn't change. It's eternal. And going to school at Morehouse, studying philosophy and religion, which you were required to as a Morehouse man, it really introduced me to more than just a simple biblical teaching, while it reintroduced that as well. And the idea of the things in the Bible, in my opinion, and because I was searching like a lot of people, like, is it Christianity? Is it the Jewish faith? Is it Islamic religion? Is it a Rastafarian faith? Is it meditation? Is it metaphysical? Is it Eastern teaching? So there was a part of me that was searching because there had to be more to this than meets the eye. And in my searching, I found that some things were constant across all of these religious teachings. Those were the things that I was interested in. And then when I discovered the idea of being able to meditate and quiet my mind and get insights and information and downloads, if you will, into myself, I couldn't find fault in that. I could find fault in a Christian teaching that said, thou shalt not kill, and then in the next chapter, it had them killing people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could find a contradiction there that was hard for me to reconcile. The biggest contradiction I had was when the Bible says, in the beginning. I thought to myself, in the beginning of what? Like, was God as a entity or presence just sitting there in darkness and silence as a blob, and then he thought, okay.
No, it's true. I've thought about that too. I'm like, it's so illogical.
There is darkness and silence. It's like this great being, this all-knowing, all-seeing, was just sitting there, and then he went, okay, I'm going to do something now, and then create this world and set everything into motion. And I literally went to the religious teachers and said, in the beginning of what? And their response was, that's the devil raising those questions in you, and you need to pray to ask God to remove that kind of questioning from your thoughts and your mind. And it was like, okay, I prayed, but it didn't remove them. I still wondered what God was doing before Genesis 1:1. And is my wondering and seeking knowledge, does that make me evil? And if I'm kind to people and I'm helping people and I'm giving money to the poor and I'm visiting the sick and visiting the imprisoned, but I don't go to your church on Sunday morning and listen to the hypocrisy, does that mean I'm locked out of a life of... And so then I just decided to read Even though it said, lean not upon your own understanding, I read something that said heaven is at hand, and that it's really a state of mind, and that it's a state of being, that if I can feel good, I can be good. And that if I can permeate that, I'd much rather do that than try and chase the elusive perfection example of Jesus Christ, because I'm never going to reach that. So I'm going to fail, and I'm going to feel like a failure, and I'm going to do that over and over again. And in the world that I live in, that's not going to be very encouraging. Doggone it, I feel, and I get it. People fail, and failure is a great lesson. But at some point, the people who talk about failure as a great lesson succeed. When you look at Bill Gates and Facebook and Tesla, all of the time, and Einstein, all of the times that they failed, at some point they succeeded. And that's when they said failure was my best teacher, because it taught me how not to do it.
Yeah.
But eventually they did it. They did something of greatness and of success and of note. And man, I thought this was going to be like a little lighthearted interview here. I make jokes and talk about people and
hey, this is what happens. It's organic conversations. I told you, wherever it goes, we're going to go.
So I believe that there's more to life than meets the eye. And when we talk about the metaphysical, we simply mean more than the physical. So it's the seen and the unseen that fuel and inform who we are. And getting back to voiceover, when I close the curtain or the door on that booth, nobody knows what I'm doing in there. I get to be and act and move in any way that I see fit. And sometimes I wish more people had a booth they could go into so that they could just be. Yeah. And I've proven that when you go in there, you can create something that will touch people around the world by going in and dealing with you.
That's true.
You don't have to travel the world to do that. King teaches us that I can never be who I am to be until you are who you are to be. You can never be who you are to be until I am who I ought to be. This is the way the world is made. He calls it the interrelated structure of reality, that we're all connected in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly, period. There's no room for discussion, debate, or negotiation. That is the way of the world. So if I go in and do my part and do it to the best of my ability, somewhere on the other side of the planet, somebody's going to feel like if he can do it, I can do it. And then when they do it, they're going to have the same effect on somebody else who didn't even know those people knew that they were doing what they were doing, especially in this age of instant gratification and compute. You're in Hawaii, I'm in Los Angeles. We're sitting here talking like we're in real time, like I'm looking at your face. There was a time when that was just on Star Trek.
Yeah.
We think that would ever be possible in real life. People have iPhones now, and they can pick up a device that they can put in their pocket and see somebody in Russia and talk to them in real time and have an app on their phone to translate while they're talking to them. There's no limitation on ideas or creativity. That's why I love what I do. I get to be creative. I have another campaign in Florida to get people to stop smoking. And so I've been on that campaign for years. And I used to smoke. I don't anymore, but I used to smoke. But the idea that I booked a job that said, quit smoking today, tobaccofreeflorida.com. I had no idea when I got the first job that 5 years later, I would have a campaign that would be paying me hundreds of thousands of dollars to encourage people to stop smoking. But if I had not stopped smoking myself, my agent never would have signed me. So it's all connected. You do your job, the universe does its job. It's division of labor. That's what Hollywood is. The sound guy doesn't do the lights. The light guy doesn't do electric. The electric guy doesn't do plants. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You your part. Stop trying to. Some of these humanoids are so busy trying to do everybody's job that none of the jobs that they're doing are effective. And sometimes you see somebody else, oh my God, he did that, so I'm going to do that too. It's like, that's not your destiny. That's not your job.
Yeah.
That's something else. So not only are you not doing your job, which the world is waiting for you to do, you're taking somebody else's job, and now he can't even have that job because you're doing it and you don't care anything about it. So I'm encouraging people to be passionate. You can explore anything, but there is something that you were meant to do. And God, when you find that and get that little groove, there's nothing like it in the world.
That's true.
That's what's tied to my spirituality. Like, what am I here for? What am I supposed to be doing? What was I meant to do? And then when you ask that question sincerely, the answers start to come.
You know, the one thing I love about the journey of spirituality, in comparison to, you know, what most Orthodox religions, I'll keep it as politically correct as I possibly can.
Yeah.
You know, what most Orthodox religions and unorthodox religions will tell you is it's about your work. It's never about the internal building of your character, of your spirit, of your soul. It's usually just about your works. And, you know, that's one of the things I run into frequently out here in Hawaii is, you know, you have the Mormons or the Latter-day Saints, they tell you that, and the Catholics and, you know, the Christians out here. And it's like, I always challenge them. I'm like, but what about the person? Why do I need to go to church on Sunday? Like, why does that denote who I am as a person if I don't go?
It's a practice. And there is something to be said for ritual and repetition, that it can help to build character. But this Bible that they read says that faith without works is dead, but it also means that works without faith is dead. Because if you're just doing stuff because somebody else has told you to do it and you're hoping that it's going to lead to something, then you aren't on your own spiritual path. And all roads, no matter what religion, lead back to a oneness, a God, a love, a life energy, a law that says be kind to one another and be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying, so for some people that works, but we are living in an age where Orthodox religion is losing its stronghold on an entire generation of people.
Yeah.
Because for me, our parents were like, you got to go to church but then when you go to church and you realize that the pastor is like doing illicit things, whether it's stealing or a Catholic priest or a Baptist minister who's engaging in acts with children that are inappropriate, it's like, how can you get up there and tell me?
Yeah.
How could you do that? You hypocrite. So it's really about, I'm just going to say this, it's about feeling good. And people think if you say that, then some people may take that to mean, well, if it feels good to beat somebody up, I'm going to do that. The truth is, it doesn't. If you talk to the people who've done that, that doesn't feel good, or it might feel good in the moment, but in terms of who they really are, that doesn't satisfy them. That doesn't fulfill them, which is part of the reason they keep doing it and looking, whether it's a drug or alcohol or cigarettes or sex or whatever it is that they're looking for, or violence, because they remain unfulfilled.
Yeah.
But if they really felt good and felt filled, they wouldn't need to go anywhere. I teach people in these, because doing the Martin Luther King, by now, it's not just about doing a Martin Luther King speech. It used to be, but now it's about Gerald C. Rivers, motivational speaker, inspirational speaker, providing insight to life's questions, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm telling people is that everything that you need is already inside of you. And that you did not come to this planet to get anything. You came to release what you have.
Yeah.
And when you do that, there's a barter system in the universe. By giving of who you really are, you will get what you really need.
Yeah. Equivalent exchange.
We didn't come to get anything. We showed up wired with everything that we need, with ideas.
Yep.
And if you don't act on those ideas, someone else will. I'm sure there's somebody listening right now who's thinking, I had an idea and I didn't do anything about it, and now somebody else is doing it and they're making millions. There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And when that idea comes to you and you're prepared and you're sincere, it will then come through you, be presented to the world in a way that will provide you with everything you need. Ask Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
Ask Apple. Ask IBM. Do you know what I mean? An idea came to them. They presented it to the world, and they were given everything that they could possibly imagine.
It's true.
If you don't act on it, somebody else will.
You know, and that makes me think of like this podcast. Like literally 1 year ago today is when I started. And it was an idea where I'm like, I like to talk to people. I like to figure out how people operate. And get insight on what they do and why they do it. I was like, why not just do a podcast? And I had a lot of opposition, a lot of people out here telling me that you'll never succeed, you'll never go anywhere, you'll never do this. And I'd always ask, why? And that word just seems to infuriate so many people. I'm like, why can't I do this? Why can't, and I just stuck with it. And that's one of the things, like I stuck with it. And a year later, like I've never even gave my show I'll say it. Oh yeah, #1 podcast in Hawaii. I didn't give it that name. People did. Ratings, and it's like, hey, why not? But
you obviously enjoy it.
I do,
and it feels good.
Yeah,
it feels good, and you get people like me who will say, "Yes, I'll show up. I'll do your show. I don't know you from Adam." But just because it feels right and it feels good, the answer is yes. The rest is details.
Yeah.
The rest is details. Do you have anything else for me? Would we want to? Did we cover? We didn't cover half the question.
No, we actually did. I think the only thing left was me asking, like of all the work that you've done over the years, like have you had the opportunity to work with other, voice actors such as like Johnny Young Bosch or Stephen Bloom or Cal Eber?
Not really. The funny thing about this work is most of the time I'm in a booth by myself. And one of two things happens if I've got dialogue with someone. Mm-hmm. One of three things. Either I don't have any access to what they did and I'm creating it, and then they have to respond to me, or the reverse is true. I don't have any access. They don't have any access. They've laid it down, and then I'm responding to them. And if you've got a good director, he makes the whole thing work. And I and this might sound strange, but I kind of like the idea that I go into a booth by myself, create my own world. Sometimes they'll give me a monitor to look at pictures or images, or I do a cartoon for Disney and Disney Junior called The Lion Guard, and it's the sequel to The Lion King, and Simba's son Kion is the new guard, and he has his friends, and it's for kids, but I have so much fun doing that because I'm in a booth by myself, and I've seen the cartoon, so I know what the world is, what the imagery is. So no, I rarely, if ever, am in the booth with somebody else. It's me and a voice director on the other side of the glass, and he's in my head. Sometimes I don't even look at him. I don't even want to see him, because it breaks the illusion of me being in this world by myself. So later I hear about it. You were on this thing with this person, or you were on this thing with this person. That's not as important to me as doing my job when I'm there.
And I guess my last question is, like, what are some projects that you have in the works currently that you are allowed to share, barring any NDAs?
Yeah, not a whole lot that I can talk about right now. I think there is a No Yolks Noodle campaign that's got my voice in it. There's Tobacco Free Florida in Florida that's still running. Oh, there's ABC Mouse. Now, this is an educational website for kids at schools and in homes across the country. And I do a narration and several of the voices, Murphy the Math Guy. And that's, like, again, a lot of fun. There's another one, it's been a little while, but it's still out there, Pacha's Pajamas. And we did that with Mos Def and Qualid Tali, and they all played characters who were supporting the environment. The little girl goes to sleep. She has on animal pajamas. Once she's asleep, the animals on her pajamas come to life and create a whole nother world for her. I have a great agent here in LA. Her name is Portia Scott at Coast to Coast Talent. I now have a brand manager named Celia Siegel who's putting me out there. And the thing that we are working on now that I can talk about is I've never done a Comic-Con. I've never done one of those conferences where I show up and there's pictures. That's in the works. That's going to happen in the coming year. And I plan to come to Hawaii when we show up there.
Nice.
So if I do that, I got to come see you, or you got to come see me.
Well, I think if it's going to be where I think it is, that's literally down the street from where I live.
Oh, wow. I believe it happens August or September.
It should be at the Hawaii Convention Center, I believe.
Yeah, so that's something I've never done, and people have been saying for the longest, man, you got to do that. You got to be out there with the fans and the people, and for a long time, I liked going into the grocery store and not having anybody know who I was. That's great, but with the internet and info technology being what it is, I remember I went to buy furniture one time and I had a Geico commercial where it was at a zoo and they were teasing the camels and I was going, Mike, 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 Mike. And that's all it was. But I thought, I'm on screen for 4 seconds. Nobody's going to know that that's me behind that thing. And this guy in the furniture store is following me around the store going, Mike, 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 Mike. So, I have a quiet place and I have a studio, obviously, in my home and broadcast quality equipment that allows me to be somewhat insulated. But I'll be on tour as Martin Luther King in January and February. I'll be at a place called Agape. It's Michael Beckwith's.
Oh, Michael Bernard Beckwith.
Yeah.
I love his stuff.
Church. So they have they broadcast live stream. So I will be there the day before the Martin Luther King holiday. So that's a great opportunity to see me in action, even for a few minutes, as Martin Luther King. And then I'll be in Malibu that night for a special event. And then I'll be at some colleges, and I'll be in Atlanta February 21st for an MLK event. And I tell you what I'll do, because I don't have them sitting here in front of me. I'll send you a list of dates and places and things where I'll be, so that when you air this, you can make that available. But the website is www.geraldcriversvo.com, and another one that's just www.geraldcrivers.com. But I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I don't keep those things up as much as I should, but I generally put information on there.
Okay, definitely. And I'll leave links to everything down in the description below of this podcast for the listeners. So definitely, everyone, make sure you go and follow Gerald on his social media outlets, and definitely check out his website. And if he's coming to a city near you, make sure you go and see his good work. And Gerald, I lied. I had one extra question to ask you.
Okay, you got it.
All right. Did you have fun?
I did. I have to tell you, it's nothing. It's nothing like what I would have anticipated. I've done several of these, and we spend a lot of time talking about the video games and the characters and the cartoons and the anime and the blah blah blah. And I don't mind talking about any of that at all. But you got something that a lot of them don't get. You got to the essence of who I am outside of that. But the stuff outside of that is what I bring to every piece of work that I do, because I want to be good. I want to do my best. I'm not competing with anybody else. I don't care what somebody else has, because what they have is for them. My job is to show up and be me and do me. And when somebody else tries to do me, the world will tell them that job's already taken. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Gerald's got that part covered already. So you go do you. He left room for you to be you and me to be me. And yes, I had fun and I appreciate it. And I'm just wishing you the absolute best with your health and with this and with your family. And yeah, let's see if we can have lunch when I get to. I've never been to Hawaii.
Really?
But we are planning, because the three big ones, I guess, are Vegas, San Diego, and Hawaii. There's several others, but those are the three that my team has decided that I need to be present for.
Okay. Well, you let me know what kind of food you like, because in the area that you're probably going to be in and where I live, whatever you like, you can find it.
Okay.
So
I think I can't go too far out there, but I have to have some authentic. I'm not into the tourist thing. I'm into the place where the people who live there go.
Okay. I'll definitely show you that, because it's all within, I want to say, a 5 to 10 minute radius from where you'll be. Like, it's
That's
all
awesome.
right there.
That's awesome, bro.
All right. And with that being said, I guess we can wrap up this podcast. Gerald, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And it's truly an honor having you on. And people, you'll be able to catch this episode on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, coming soon to iHeartRadio. And we just signed a contract to get the show on Sirius FM. So that will be starting in January. So it's really big for us.
So you're blowing up.
Yeah, unexpectedly. I'm just a guy who likes to talk. But, yeah, people enjoy it, so, you'll be able to find it there. And
let me know where I can find it, and I will blast it out on my social media to have people listening for it.
Definitely will do. And, Gerald, stick around. I'm just going to stop recording, and I'll do the outro part. And thank you guys for watching and listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. Did you enjoy this episode of the Kasanova Podcast? Well, I hope you did. And if you did, please make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. And let us know what we can improve upon, what you liked, what you didn't like, and all that good stuff. And just make sure you always have a good time. That being said, this is your boy Mekel Kasanova, Hawaii's favorite YouTuber. I am signing out, and I'll catch you on the next episode.